One of the real privileges I think the faculty have at the university is to work with students and to work with graduate students. We've been really fortunate over the years in our division to have really outstanding graduate students. Two of my students are here this evening. Cameron Locke, who's working on a dual program. You know where Cameron is? Raise your hand, Cameron. Cameron's working on a dual program in the College of Veterinary Medicine and also a graduate program with community animal science. And then Jordan Thomas is working on a PhD, and I think many of you have met and interacted with Jordan over the last several years, but I want to brag on him a little bit. Jordan has really been a big cog in the wheel relative to the work that we've done over the last several years. And his work has not only been recognized in terms of some of the stuff that we've done up here, but it's been recognized on a national basis. So to just give you an idea of how that work has been recognized, Jordan was recognized a year ago as one of the Midwest Animal American Society of Animal Science Midwest Scholars. He then went on to be named the outstanding graduate student at the University of Missouri, which in part is no small deal. And then that was sort of topped off this summer when he was named as the outstanding graduate student in the United States within the American Society of Animal Science. So I'm going to turn it over to him because a lot of the work that he's done has been so instrumental in terms of our program and the industry at large. But Jordan has been leading programs over the last couple of years in terms of development of breeding strategies to facilitate expanded use of sex-sorted semen in the beef industry, which really will ultimately have a huge impact in terms of the industry in general. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jordan.
Thank you, Dak. First of all, thanks for the great turnout. First of all, thanks for the great turnout tonight. Of course, we normally have these field days in the daytime rather than in the evening, so it's really good to have a great turnout the first year that moving it towards the evening time. I hope you find this works well for your schedule. So what I'm going to talk about is really kind of the culmination of several years worth of research that has been conducted not only on private ranches across the United States, but also specifically here at the Thompson Research Center. And I just want to emphasize to you, as members of this community, what an important resource this center is for us. And thank you for your continued support of it. But a lot of this work that really led up to this was conducted here at Thompson. And the talk that I want to give today is really focused around the use of sex-sorted semen. So many of you are probably familiar with the concept of sex-sorted semen, and it's that we can sort sperm cells to either bear an X or a Y chromosome, and therefore result in either a heifer or a bull calf. And you can imagine several ways to potentially use that in your operation, right? Whether you're trying to generate bulls for breeding purposes, or you're trying to generate higher numbers of replacement females, or maybe you just want higher numbers of steer calves to market. I'm not going to talk necessarily about all the potential ways that you could use that technology, and it's going to vary a lot from operation to operation. But I want to show you some new opportunities that we feel like we have to actually use this technology in a commercial setting. I don't know if that's working or not. Maybe not. Okay, perfect. So the first thing is, when using sex-sorted semen, you have to recognize that it's a different product than conventional semen is in AI. And it's kind of different for a couple of reasons. One is that there are fewer numbers of sperm cells that are actually placed in a given unit of semen. So rather than conventional semen, which is usually around 20 million cells per unit, sex-sorted semen historically has been around 2 million cells per unit. And then it is also going through a sorting process, and so that involves several steps. They stain the sperm cells, they hit them with a laser, and then try to read the fluorescence that results from that process. And then they go at an incredibly fast speed through this process and also get diluted to a really low concentration. And so you'll hear some of the early researchers that did a lot of the foundational work with sex-sorted semen talk about how amazed they are that you get any fertility at all, right? And in some respects, it really is amazing. But now what's happened in the last really 3 to 4 years has been substantial improvements in the process which is used to sort the sperm cells. And so the degree of damage that occurs to the sperm cells is a lot less than in previous generations of this product. And they're also putting increased numbers of sperm cells, in a given unit of semen. So rather than the typical 2 million cells per unit, now we're looking at 4 million cells per unit. So with all that being said, if you're going to use a unit like that, a unit of sex-sorted semen that you know has at least been partially compromised in terms of quality and in terms of the numbers of sperm cells in a given unit, you need to think really carefully about how you use that in relationship to the physiology of the female. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to potentially do that in an AI system. So this would be, for those of you that do estrus synchronization, you're probably familiar with what the bare bones of this particular protocol is. This is essentially the 7-day coaching plus cedar protocol. And so it involves insertion of a cedar, which contains progesterone on day 0, and then also administration of gonadotropin-releasing hormone, or GnRH. There are several different pharmaceutical manufacturers that make that product. So administration of GnRH, and then 7 days later, so let's say you did this on a Monday, you'd come back the following Monday, removing that cedar device and then administering prostaglandin. Now what's going to happen after that is heat expression. So expression of standing estrus over the course of those next 6 days. And one thing that you certainly could do to carry out an AI program is to detect for estrus, right? I could go out and I could watch those animals. I could do what we call the AM/PM rule, where if I see females in heat in the morning, I breed them that evening. If I see them in heat in the evening, I breed them the following morning. But you can imagine the labor that goes into a system like that. And certainly those of you that have been doing AI for a long time know exactly what I'm talking about. Another approach, though, has been to do what we call a fixed-time artificial insemination. And in that case, we're going in at a predetermined time point, which is really based on a lot of the research about what the optimal time point is. And so for this protocol, that's at 66 hours after that prostaglandin and cedar removal. And then at that time, all of the animals, regardless of whether they have expressed estrus or not, are time inseminated, and we administer GnRH. And so obviously there's advantages to that, right, in terms of the amount of labor that you have to put into conducting an AI program, and the amount of days that you have to carry that AI program out over. But there are also disadvantages, and that's where this idea of split-time AI comes into play. And I'm not going to go through the development of split-time AI much. I'll just show you what those current protocols are. But split-time AI is intended to essentially mitigate some of the challenges that arise when we do a fixed-time AI program for fertility. And so one of those challenges is that by inseminating females at sort of a specific time, by design, we're not inseminating every female at the optimal time for that particular female. So we know that we compromise fertility a little bit. But a big problem is the fact that those that have not expressed estrus, those that haven't come into heat by that time, we know that their pregnancy rates time to AI are particularly low. And so that's in part because of this physiology that we know about timing of ovulation in relationship to expression of estrus. And so from the time of onset of estrus activity, so when that female first stands and is willing to be mounted by another animal, there's about a 30-hour window from the onset of estrus to ovulation. And so if you inseminate, for example, in a fixed-time AI approach, a cow that has not expressed estrus or a heifer that has not expressed estrus, it's going to be another 28 to 30 hours until she actually ovulates. And so in the case of sex-sorted semen, you're asking those sperm cells to stick around in the reproductive tract and remain viable for a fairly long period of time. And in a lot of cases, that's just not a reasonable expectation for that product. And so I'm not going to go through the development of split-time AI, but here's where we are with those protocols. And so for heifers, based on the 14-day cedar protocol, what we do is we apply an estrotech patch at prostaglandin on day 30. And if you're not familiar with estrotech patches, they're essentially this, it kind of looks like a lottery ticket in terms of the gray coating that's on it. And as that female is mounted, that gray coating wears off, and a bright color that's underneath that gray coating shows through. And so we apply those gray patches at prostaglandin, and then at the time of 66 hours, when you would typically carry out a fixed-time AI protocol, we're going to evaluate those patches, and we're going to only inseminate those heifers that have an activated patch at that time. And those heifers also don't require GnRH administration, because we know that they have definitively expressed estrus. Then 24 hours later, all of the remaining heifers are AI. And at that time, you'll also have a fair proportion of those heifers that have gone on to express estrus, so they have these activated patches. But for those that have not expressed estrus, those with the gray patch, we administer GnRH in order to induce that ovulation. So it's a fairly straightforward approach. It's not particularly complicated. And for cows, a very similar approach, but just using the 7-day posting plus cedar protocol. And so I'm going to show you what that protocol appears to be capable of when we use it in conjunction with sex-sorted semen, which was really the goal of a lot of this research. And so we looked at using this new sex-sorted semen product called Sex Ultra, again with 4 million cells per unit, in comparison to conventional semen at the typical 25 million cells per unit. We had over 850 heifers across 4 fairly large locations. And then we used a couple of different bowls and pre-assigned those heifers to a particular bowl and a particular semen type in a way that allowed us to have really representative groups. So we took into account their reproductive tract score and also their weight. And then for all of the heifers, we used this 14-day cedar protocol, again with this split-time AI approach I talked about. So I'll show you a couple things real quick. The first is that these are well-managed heifers, so their reproductive tract score, which is an indicator that they are cycling, they're ready to breed, is high in these groups because they're well-managed. If you look, though, I want to highlight what their heat response was in total when we use split-time AI. That's about a 90% heat response, 89% across those treatments in total. So that's 89% of the heifers actually expressing standing estrus prior to the time that they receive an insemination. That is hugely beneficial for fertility, right? That's a big deal. And that's part of why this approach really works well. So I'm going to show you the results for conventional semen and for sex-sorted semen within the locations in this study. So in this first location, which was a location in Idaho, 62% for conventional semen, 61% for the sex-sorted semen. In this second location, a location in South Dakota that was fairly large, 60% with conventional, 52% with sex-sorted semen. In location 3, 60% conventional, 58% with the sex. And in location 4, another fairly large location in South Dakota, 58% and 42% with the sex-sorted semen. So if we look across all of those locations, 60% with conventional semen, which of course is a good pregnancy rate to see in heifers with conventional semen. 52% with sex-sorted semen, so a bit of a reduction. But if you look at that pregnancy rate, like in excess of 50% with sex-sorted semen, that's very encouraging compared to what we have historically been at with this product. And so I think it suggests that we have a lot more opportunity to use this kind of product in a targeted way. If we look at it for both of the bulls in those studies, we didn't really see much of a difference between those two bulls. Both of them were slightly higher with conventional semen as opposed to the sex-sorted semen. I do want to show you just the pregnancy rates by the estrus expression of those heifers, just briefly. So if you look at those heifers that express heat prior to 66 hours, 62% with conventional semen, 53% with the sexed. Those that express heat in the next 24 hours. And just look at what a fairly substantial proportion of the group that is, and that's really what's driving those high pregnancy rates with the split-time AI approach. 68% with conventional semen, 60% with sexed. Those that fail to express estrus are always the challenge in any kind of timed AI protocol. And so 29% with conventional semen and also 29% with sexed. But by doing this split-time AI approach, this is a very small proportion of their total group, right? We're talking about 10% of the heifers in this particular trial that are getting those low pregnancy rates. And so that's really part of what's driving high pregnancy rates using split-time AI. A lot of you might be asking, well, what's the accuracy of this sex-sorted semen? You know, is it actually going to give me 100% heifer calves or 100% bull calves? And no, it's not. It's going to be in the mid to high 90% accuracy range. And for several reasons, they have to set their accuracy at that level in order to make a unit in an economically viable way. In this particular study, we observed them to be 96% accurate. And we used an X-sorted product, so heifer calves resulting from that. And then, of course, the conventional semen was right at 50-50. The last point is the last point that I really want to make, and then I'll take some questions. But if you look at our final pregnancy rates at the end of a 60-day natural service breeding season, note that there was no difference between those that received conventional semen for the first service versus sex-sorted semen for the Forest Service. And so that slightly lower pregnancy rate didn't appear to have a big impact in the total breeding performance of those heifers. And again, I think that points to how you could potentially use this product in a reproductive plan for heifers. So with that being said, it looks like a very effective option. If you want to know a little bit more about split-time AI, there are some brochures over here in the other room on some of the tables, just about split-time AI in general. It goes through the development and sort of the trials that went up to those approaches. And then for the sex-sorted stuff, everything that I presented today is also on a poster in the back. So feel free to take a look at that. But are there any questions real quick that I can try to answer?
Jordan, you might comment on the cow trial and what's underway.
Yeah, okay, so you might be saying, well, what about mature cows? And a lot of producers do think about that maybe their best place to use sex-sorted semen might be on the mature cow herd and potentially identify some females that have really elite maternal performance and target those females, for example, to generate replacement heifers out of. And we're really interested in that question too. And we have a fairly large field trial, a set of field trials underway right now with about 1,600 cows across several different locations, looking again at sort of this question of fixed time AI versus split time AI, and also using conventional. So we'll have more results in that next spring. Dr. Lammers. Yeah, so I think Dr. Lammerson's question is sort of getting at the idea of what's the big driving factor behind low pregnancy rates with sex-sorted semen. Is it just the fact that these sperm cells have been damaged in the sorting process, or is it just that we're only putting 4 million cells in a given unit of semen? So he was asking, what if we use 4 million cells in a unit of conventional semen? What type of pregnancy rates would you get? The answer to that historically has been that you could increase sort of the dose with sex-sorted semen to a point, let's say, and it's going to vary for an individual bull, but at some point you're going to maximize that pregnancy rate, and you can't just dump 20 million cells of sex-sorted semen in there and get the same fertility you would with conventional. But I think both factors are involved. The degree to which it's involved is probably bull to bull dependent. There's some bulls that even with conventional semen can get very good fertility in really low doses, and there's others that really need to be in high doses. Yeah, good question. So he asked, are there particular bulls that are selected for use in sex sorting? And that's an excellent point. Not every bull's sperm cells tolerate the sorting process very well. And so those bulls are screened at those particular studs, and those units are evaluated for example, post-thaw motility and several different factors that are well above my understanding of sperm physiology in terms of what all they do in that evaluation. But no, not every bull does work in the sex-sorted process, and so your ability to select bulls when you use sex-sorted semen is somewhat more limited because the number of bulls that do well with that sorting process is lower. Dr. Bailey.
Okay, so this is kind of a long question. I hope I spit it out right, but is there enough data from auction market sales of heifers that have been inseminated with sex semen to give you an idea of what the premium the market might bear for?
That's a really good question. I think everybody might not have heard him, but he was asking, is there enough data, for example, from auction market reports about what the potential value of an animal that's been inseminated with sex-sorted semen versus conventional semen is? Quite frankly, no, in terms of that specific. But certainly, if you look at like the Show Me Select data, where a veterinarian has fetal sexed the pregnancy and actually determined what the sex of that calf is, that's going to be a similar situation, right? Where the buyer can buy a heifer carrying a calf of a known sex. Jared, do you know off the top of your head what the premium is for that? I don't know either, but that's certainly something we could look at. Any last questions? Yeah, good question. So if I have units that are sorted to contain X-bearing sperm to generate heifer calves versus units that are sorted to contain Y-bearing sperm to make bull calves, is there any difference in the fertility of those two products? The answer is most likely no, but that hasn't necessarily been really rigorously tested. But every indication is that there is no difference. All right, if you have any other questions, I'm going to be around and I'd be happy to talk to you about this, but thank you very much.